Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here tonight with all of you. Should be a great late night conversation. Last night, it didn't work out. I was doing lives in Times Square about Julian Assange, and so I was exhausted. My last live was at 11, and I just had to cancel things. But tonight, I'm safe at home here in my Brooklyn apartment. There's kind of a thunderstorm going on outside, so if you see some flashing lightning, it's not the end of the world. It's just the wonders of nature. But yeah, everybody, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. So the good news is that we are once again streaming on Facebook, right? We have been on Rumble and we're still on Rumble. We should be on Rumble right now. I think there was some kind of issue with the connection, but we're on YouTube. That's the primary outlet platform we're on. We're also streaming from my Facebook page. So we're streaming all around. Good times. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. Always great to do it that way. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the way that we do these streams is I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call. We find out who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. And I guess we're not on Rumble tonight. We'll be on Rumble tomorrow night. But since we're on Super Chat, since we're on YouTube, if you want me to answer a question in the second half of the show, just do what our good friend Gala did and send a Super Chat. And I will make a point of answering the Super Chat questions in the second half of our program. That's the way it works. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, that's the way these things work. No big announcements. Oh, I guess there is a big announcement. Didn't think of this. Our book, Do You Believe in Growth? The CPI pamphlet that we originally published for the Libertarian Party convention. We have put it up on Amazon as a book. There's a longer version of it that includes a couple other pieces that is now available on Amazon. It's the pamphlet we put out for the Libertarian Party convention. Do you believe in growth? Why Russia and China keep rising while U.S. society stifles innovation. That is now available as a book, and it is on Amazon for $8. Shout out to Carl Payne, who did the layout work. We added a couple other articles and presentations to make it full length. Right. And now it is available. Features a lot of talk about the World Youth Festival, things like that. So if you want a copy of Do You Believe in Growth, the new pamphlet that tells you what CPI is all about, makes our case for socialism, talks about the Uhuru movement, etc. By all means, you can get it on Amazon now for $8. And if you're interested in distributing it, I guess we could send it to you in bulk. We're going to do another printing of the pamphlet version, which is smaller, pretty soon. So that's a great development. Do You Believe in Growth is now available on Amazon. So, if you want it, you can get a copy. It's now available on Amazon. Here, I'll drop the link on the Facebook as well. So there we go. But you can get it at any book dealer. You just, tell them the name and the author, and you can get it. It has wider distribution. So if you want to go to your local community bookstore, Mustard Jeans, you want to go to your local community bookstore, you can get a copy of it there. Is it a large pamphlet? It's 85 pages in length. The original version is only 40 pages in length, 41 pages, but the book version is 85 pages in length. Same size, though, but 85 pages. So over twice as long. So there you go. That is our new development, our new announcement. Center for Political Innovation, which is our organization, CPI, is marching ahead. We got a lot of exciting activities coming up. We're engaging in mass outreach and in the process of developing the methods for doing so. And we're getting excited about having a number of events in the coming year, all leading up to our convention. So that's going to be very exciting. We just had a very important meeting talking about what it's going to mean to really put out of the movement to the masses into practice, start reaching people on a mass scale, building the kind of constructive, optimistic, socialistic, anti-imperialist movement that this country needs, a city building movement, a movement. It's not about tearing things down, but about building and constructing. We're doing it. And we're very excited to do the real work necessary to build the movement that we need. So, yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. As I said, the way we do things, first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, I answer your super chat, then from there, I do the roll call. We find out who's on the other side of the camera. And then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if you got a question, super chat us and we will give you an answer. All right, folks. Now, I'm going to go into my opening remarks. The title that I gave for this stream was Desperate for World War III, the Desperate Madness of Decaying Imperialism. If you haven't been paying attention lately, that may not make sense to you. But if you've been paying attention to what's been happening lately, our leaders very much are doing everything they can to provoke an all-out confrontation with Russia. I don't know if you saw what happened on the beach in Russia, in Sevastopol, right? But this is what happened. Group of Russian people were just on the beach, a lovely summer day, and American ATACMS missiles started falling out of the sky. 4 people died, including children. And this is terrorism. I mean, if you attack a group of civilians who are enjoying a hot summer day on the beach and ATACMS missiles start falling on them, that is called terrorism. We also know about what happened at the nightclub. Not the nightclub, but the concert venue, and how the concert venue was shot up, mass killing took place, and that the United States government went out of its way to tell the Russian government ahead of time, oh, there's going to be an attack on a concert hall, didn't tell them specifically where it was, etc., just so the Russian government would know that when the attack happened, it came from the United States. And now it's been proven that Ukrainian forces were prepared to meet the attackers at the Ukrainian border. They were fleeing to the Ukrainian border after their vicious act of terrorism. The Crocus City concert hall, utterly horrendous. The United States has provided Ukraine with these missiles. And these missiles are not something Ukraine is capable of just shooting off by itself. They need American assistance. And of course, Russia is going to have to respond to this. I mean, this whole situation is absolutely atrocious. The USA went out of its way to provoke Russia for 8 years straight, to put Russia in a situation where Russia felt it had no choice but to go into Ukraine. And that's an aspect of this conflict that is not made clear to Americans. People have no idea. But I will show you. I will show you what American media never bothers to show you. I will show you the Alley of Angels. Starting in 2014, after the United States overthrew Ukraine's elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, and the people of the eastern regions declared independence from that government that had outlawed their language and was tearing down the World War II memorials. When the people of Donbass declared independence, the U.S.-backed Ukrainian government started bombing them. And it kept bombing them for 8 years straight. And it killed between 14 and 16,000 people. For 8 years straight, they bombed the people of Donbass. Russia facilitated a peace agreement called the Minsk Agreement, the Minsk Accords, that would stop the bombing. And the Ukrainian government never implemented it. Zelensky ran for president on a platform of implementing the peace agreement. And it never happened. And now, after 8 years of bombing, after U.S. weaponry, bombs, drones, etc., have been falling on them for 8 years, finally, Russia has gone in to protect these people. Russia felt it had no choice but to go in and protect the people of the Donbass region. And that is why this war is happening. And of course, you will never hear about that. CNN makes it sound like Russia just went into Ukraine for no reason because they wanted more territory or something. And that's absurd. Russia has recognized the independence of these countries, allowed them to vote to join with the Russian Federation. And, what the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics have been subjected to for the past 8 years is murder. And the people of Russia, have very much wanted to help the peoples of the eastern regions. In fact, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation was one of the main supporters of the efforts to go into the Donbass and defend what is now the new republics. And the idea that this is somehow Russia engaging in colonialism, that's absolutely ridiculous. This is Russia taking action to stop mass murder by a U.S.-backed regime. And what I find to be infuriating is that CNN does not think that the lives of these children matter. CNN doesn't think they count. Wikipedia has taken down the Wikipedia page to this memorial because it doesn't want you to know about these children. U.S. media has decided these children do not matter. They will tell you sob stories about civilians in other conflicts, but the children of Donbass don't matter because they speak Russian, because Russia is the one protecting them. And I find that absolutely infuriating. But the reason that I called this stream Desperate for World War III, the Madness of Decaying Imperialism, is because I want to talk about why this is happening. Because it's not only the situation when it comes to the new republics and the war in Ukraine. Not only the war in Ukraine, there's also the United States piling weaponry onto the island of Taiwan. The U.S. government officially recognizes only one China. The U.S. government recognizes China as including the island of Taiwan, Taiwan being China. But regardless, the American government continues to pile weaponry onto the island of Taiwan. In addition to that, the U.S. government has given Israel a green light to bombard and kill the Palestinians. I mean, Israel is horrifying the whole world with their relentless bombardment of Gaza. And the U.S. government has decided there will be no restrictions. More aid and weaponry will be sent to Israel, and they will be allowed to just kill the Palestinians around the clock. The U.S. government is also increasing the provocations on the Korean Peninsula. There's already 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea, and the U.S. government has continued the provocative war games, the provocative military drills that simulate an all-out invasion of North Korea that are being carried out by the Ukrainian government. the South Korean government. And the U.S. government practices these drills, which simulate an invasion and attack on North Korea. Today, it appears there was an attempted military coup in Bolivia because the government of Bolivia has pivoted in a more pro-Russia, pro-China, anti-imperialist direction. It appears that forces in Bolivia aligned with the United States attempted to violently overthrow the government today. Now, it appears the Bolivian president has been successful. The coup has been defeated, but it ain't over till it's over, as they say. We don't know exactly what the outcome will be, but it appears that the United States government and its allies in Bolivia attempted a military coup d'etat today to overthrow the Bolivian government. I mean, in every corner of the world, the Biden administration is trying to escalate to an all-out confrontation. All the countries that are aligned with Russia, that are aligned with China, that are aligned with Venezuela, that are aligned with Iran, seem to be targeted by the United States, attacked, threatened. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's going on. And you wouldn't know this. These are the provocative drills. This is some of the footage from the Korean Peninsula of the provocative drills the U.S. leaders have been engaged in. Particularly outrageous what's happening. And yes, for some reason, Rumble isn't working. StreamYard is saying the connection isn't working. So we're just on YouTube and Facebook tonight. I don't know why Rumble isn't working tonight, but it is what it is. So we're streaming where we can stream. But can you imagine, right, if this was happening in Mexico, if the Chinese military was in Mexico practicing an all-out attack on the United States and shooting off missiles as they would do if they were about to invade the United States. Can you imagine if the Russian military was on the Canadian border practicing all-out invasion of the United States, shooting off missiles? And I mean, this is what the United States is doing on the Korean Peninsula right now. A government that has already killed millions of people in the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. government killed millions of Koreans during the Korean War. They are practicing the all-out destruction of North Korea. And of course, North Korea is responding by proving that their missile systems work, testing nuclear weapons, showing that they can retaliate if they are attacked. It is an absolutely horrendous situation. And, it is absolutely horrendous. And the point, though, is why is this happening? What is driving this? And that is what makes these streams very special. There's a lot of people on YouTube who are happy to tell you all about this stuff, right? Give you an update on world events from kind of an anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-establishment perspective. But we bring you something different here because we bring you analysis. We bring you understanding. We are anti-imperialists. What is imperialism? A lot of people think that imperialism is a synonym for colonialism. It's one country taking over another country. That's not correct. A lot of people think imperialism is a policy. If a country attacks another country or invades another country, it is engaging in imperialism. But the reality is that imperialism is a system. Imperialism is capitalism. The system of production organized for profit in its monopolistic stage. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. That's what imperialism is. Imperialism is a global economic system that is defined by the export of capital, meaning that instead of products being exported, corporations are exported. Instead of exporting French fries around the world, McDonald's is exported around the world. Corporations, huge multinational trusts, cartels, and syndicates based in the Western countries that tend to be centered around financial institutions, spread their tentacles across the world and hold back economic development. The export of capital, the carving out of spheres of influence, the partition of the world by an international financial oligarchy. This is the language that Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Russian Revolution, used to describe the capitalist system in the lead up to World War I. It had reached the stage of imperialism. Bankers had become dominant over industrialists. Huge multinational corporations were exporting themselves across the planet, not exporting products. Territory was seized, the world was being partitioned, an international financial oligarchy was emerging. And there are many examples that we can give of imperialism. One great example of imperialism is what the British Empire did in India. The people of India have been weaving for thousands and thousands of years. But when the British went to India, what did they do? They burned the textile looms. And this people, a proud people in India that had been weaving for thousands of years, were forced to import their cloth from Britain. Why is that? Because imperialism is about maintaining a monopoly. What was it that Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian independence activist, was arrested for? Boiling salt water. Why was he arrested for that? Because in India, it was a crime to boil your own salt water. You had to buy salt that was imported to India from a British corporation. That is a great example of imperialism. India was seized as a captive market for the Dutch East India Company. The people of India were impoverished. The people of India were enslaved economically, prevented from developing their own industries by the giant banking financial houses of Britain. And it wasn't just India. There's a big bank on Wall Street and in London, and it's called HSBC Bank. Now, what does HSBC stand for? Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Now, is this a bank that's actually from Hong Kong and Shanghai? Is it a Chinese Communist Bank? Of course not. This is a British bank that was set up by the British Empire because prior to the Chinese Revolution, China was the sick man of Asia. The British waged 2 opium wars to force China to accept the importation of narcotics, to lift their tariffs, to open themselves up to free trade and become the captive market of British financiers and bankers. These are older examples, but there's much more recent ones. The people of Mexico have been growing their own food for thousands of years, long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. But today, Mexico imports almost all of its food from the United States because with the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, Bill Clinton enabled American agribusiness to just crush the farming sector of Mexico. The people in Haiti have been growing their own food. Same thing happened. Haiti now imports its food from the United States, right? A captive market has been created. The corporations have seized these countries as spheres of influence. Another great example that I give is Nigeria. The country in Africa that exports the most oil of any other country is Nigeria. And the people of Nigeria are very poor, even though they have so much of a very, very, very valuable commodity on the world markets. No country in Africa has more oil at this point to sell on the international markets than Nigeria. But if you go to Nigeria, you will see mass poverty. You will see people in the Niger Delta region who are living in extreme conditions of poverty. Why? Because that oil is under the control of Royal Dutch Shell and BP and Chevron and ExxonMobil. They don't control their own natural resources. They have been partitioned, seized as part of a sphere of influence for American gigantic oil companies. There are many examples that we can give of imperialism. And we live in a world today that is dominated by huge multinational corporations that are holding back development around the world. The main way in the 90s and early 2000s that they engaged in holding back development was with economic policies of neoliberalism. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank would provide development loans to governments. However, whenever the country received these loans, it came with requirements. And those requirements were lifting tariffs, laying off government workers, gutting the public sector, neoliberal economic reforms, cutting the role of government in the economy, privatizing public services, lifting tariffs, and allowing your country to be economically looted was a requirement. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, neoliberalism was imposed all across Eastern Europe, and it was devastating. 30% unemployment in Russia, mass suffering, sex trafficking, drug gangs. It was an economic disaster in the 1990s across Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the overthrow of socialism. And it's only with the rise of Putin that Russia has been able to restore itself economically by reasserting government control over oil and gas. In Latin America in the 1990s, neoliberal economic reforms were used to devastate countries. I went to Ecuador when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, I went to Quito, Ecuador in 1999 with my dad. I had never seen that level of poverty. There was so much poverty. I got off the airplane in the middle of the night with my father. We arrived in Quito, Ecuador, and there were crowds of desperately poor, starving people. At the time, I did not know why these people were desperately poor and starving, but I later found out. It was because of the fact that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank had forced Ecuador to give up its currency and adopt the US dollar. There had been a crash on the Asian markets, and there had been some weather phenomenon, and they had been forced to privatize their state-run oil industry, which was used to subsidize farmers. And the farms of Ecuador, the rural areas, the farming sector of Ecuador just collapsed. And so these poor people that I saw when I got off the airplane, they were crowds and crowds of desperately poor people from the countryside of Ecuador who had been laid off, who had lost their farms, who had lost their land and were desperate and piled into the city, desperate and poor. Neoliberalism was the main way that imperialism destroyed countries during the 1990s, during the early 2000s. But more recently, after the global financial crisis of 2008 and in the aftermath of the pandemic, the main way that imperialism is engaging in holding back development and devastating countries across the planet, the main way they've been doing it is with forced degrowth. We saw, for example, Sri Lanka. BlackRock, the British financial institution, forced Sri Lanka to switch its farming sector to being organic. And the result of doing so was that crop outputs vastly decreased because they weren't using pesticides, etc. And that resulted in food shortages across Sri Lanka. Another example of this is African countries are continuously told by the United States and by BlackRock Corporation that they cannot build power plants. That a coal power plant in Zaire, a coal power plant in the developing world, that this is somehow going to hurt the environment. And so these countries have to be kept poor. And they can't build hydroelectric power plants. China is willing to finance the construction of electrification in Africa. And BlackRock and the U.S. government are repeatedly doing everything they can to stop it. Right now, at a time when there is a crisis of malnutrition in Africa, there's limited access to food in certain parts of the developing world. We have the U.S. government openly talking about how it is urgently needed that the global food supply be decreased. And the Biden administration is going out of its way to reduce the global food supply. Farmers in Europe are protesting because the Norwegian government, the government of Denmark, the government of Germany, the government of Belgium is telling the farmers, you've got to stop growing so much food. It's bad for the environment. We need more arable land. And they are reducing the amount of food that is existing in the world right now. Why is this happening? Why are countries being prevented from electrifying? Why are countries being prevented from developing their agricultural sector? What is going on? What on earth is going on? What's going on is that we are having a long-term economic crisis. Capitalism has a built-in problem called overproduction. Now, the problem of overproduction, people hear it and they think that just means too much stuff. Oh, they're producing too much. That's not what it means. It's that people cannot afford to buy back what is produced. And the more that is produced, the poorer people get. And Peter Coffin has been calling it a value crisis as a way of explaining it in a way that people understand what it is. But I explained the basic mathematics of it in a presentation I gave a few years ago. So I'm going to put that presentation on because it's pretty simple to understand. It's pretty basic mathematics. If you understand how production is carried out under capitalism, you can understand why people are homeless because there are too many houses, why people are hungry because there is too much food. So I'm going to show the Socialist Math clip. Here you go.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. And you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America. So I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I'm going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right? If you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Now that is a reality of capitalist production, and there's many ways of illustrating it to people. We have the first CPI educational manual, We Are City Builders. In the first chapter, or in the second section of it, we have section 2.2, which is called the Parable of the Water Tank. And it's written by Edward Bellamy, who was a great American socialist leader. And I believe it's on, hold on, I'm just going to pull up the Parable of the Water Tank. And this great American socialist leader, Edward Bellamy, explained the problem of overproduction with a story he wrote called The Parable of the Water Tank. I've talked to people about self-driving cars. Self-driving cars should be a great thing and would be a great thing in a rational society. But under capitalism, they lead to mass unemployment, right? If we adopted self-driving cars, millions of cab drivers and Uber drivers and people who work in traffic courts would lose their jobs. There's many, many examples of this. And it is this built-in problem of capitalism that drives imperialism and is driving the insane behavior of imperialism in our time. First of all, part of the reason that the imperialists are constantly seizing parts of the world and destroying their economies and forcing them to be captive markets is they need a place to dump their products. They're producing more than their domestic market can consume. And so in order to stabilize the economy, they need somebody to buy their products. And so they seize developing countries and hold them as client states or captive markets in order to dump their products. The second thing is that as technology advances, the built-in problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit gets worse. That whenever you have a big technological leap, it tends to be followed by a long-term economic crisis. Jack Ma explained this very, very well when I saw him speak at Valde Discussion Club. He explained it in great detail about how World War I came after a number of economic crises and panics on the stock market. World War II came after the Great Depression of the 1930s, and that when you have big advances in the ability of capitalists to produce products, you tend to have long-term economic fallout as a result, because it leads to less workers being hired. It leads to the rate of profits that the capitalist makes on each product going down. It leads to a big economic problem. And we are living in the aftermath of one of the greatest episodes of technological advancement we've ever seen. Artificial intelligence is doing amazing things. Computer production. I mean, if you look at what 3D printers can do, if you look at what can be done now, I mean, you can make products practically without anyone making them, without any human being involved in the process. And as a result of that, we have a long-term economic crisis, and the rate of profit is declining. And as the rate of profit is declining, the capitalists are getting more and more desperate. And I want to pull up the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto is a great resource on all of this. And the Communist Manifesto explains the problem of overproduction, right? So we'll just talk about that. Right? Just talk about it. I'll just read to you from the Communist Manifesto. Hold on. Just got to find the section. Hold on, just finding the quote. All righty. Here we go. And this is Marx explaining the problem of overproduction. It is enough to mention the commercial crises that by their periodical return put the existence of their entire bourgeois society on trial, each time more threateningly. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself back in a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut the supply of every means of substance. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. Why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered. And so, as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder to the whole of society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. How does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by the enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces, and on the other, by the conquest of new markets and more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. So, this irrational crisis of people being hungry because there is too much food, people being homeless because there are too many houses, of commerce stopping because there's too much commerce, civilization halting because there is too much civilization. the means of subsistence, food, housing, etc., not being available because there's too much of it. This frequently happens, and the way that it is resolved is by mass destruction and more thorough exploitation, and by conquering new markets with war. This is the built-in problem of capitalism, is that human technological advancement and human creativity frequently exceeds the narrow restrictions of the profit-oriented system. We have created so much wealth, and we have advanced technologically so much that the limits of a system where profit dictates what gets produced, profit determines who gets employed, profit determines how much things cost, profit is the driving force behind the economy, and you live or die based on the almighty dollar. Human beings have exceeded that. Our ability to create, our creative genius has led us beyond the narrow restrictions of the profit-oriented system. And because of that, the only way to stabilize things is with mass destruction. And that is what Joe Biden is doing. That's why he's going to Africa and trying to stop them from building power plants. That's why they are trying to stop the farmers of Belgium and the farmers of the world from producing more food. That's why they are at this time doing everything they can to forcibly degrow big sections of the planet. And that's also why they are escalating confrontations with countries that have broken free from their dominance. They want to conquer new markets to save their system. Their system is in a state of collapse for a completely irrational reason, because human beings have gotten too good at making stuff. And as a result, there's mass poverty. This doesn't make any sense. And there's a big chunk of the world that is no longer restrained by this insanity. In China, the banks and the factories and the industries are organized and under the control of the Communist Party. The Communist Party has 5-year economic plans. There's plenty of market mechanisms that are utilized, but ultimately production is carried out according to the state central plan and in line with what will make the country wealthier and will ensure economic growth in the long term, not what is in the interests of private owners. And the same goes for Iran. The same goes for Russia. The same goes for a whole section of the world that has broken out of this system and has an economy that is organized around a government that has emerged from an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist revolution. And as a result, their growth is not limited and restricted by the irrationality of the market. So they are continuing to rise while the West is continuing to spiral into more and more of a crisis. The West is more and more desperate to destroy the productive forces, to drive down the amount of goods being produced, to conquer new markets with war, because the crisis of overproduction is getting worse and worse and worse. And this is what is behind, when I talk about the madness of imperialism and decay, this is what is behind it. Technological advancement, which should be a good thing. Technological advancement should be good. But we live in a society where profits are in command and the irrationality of the market cannot contain and doesn't have room for human creativity beyond a certain limit. And the role of the worker at the assembly line is being reduced. And as a result, society is spinning out of control. The ruling class are fighting with one another. Living standards are dropping in the Western countries. We are entering a long-term crisis, right? And all of this lays out the need for there to be a movement, a real movement of working class people saying we need a government that will work in the interest of society overall. We need a popular government that will control the means of production, that will rationally organize the economy, not let profit be in command, but rationally organize the economy so that growth can continue. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And we have raised that There are 4 things that such a government could do in order to ensure economic growth. The first would be to enact public ownership of our natural resources. Make it so that the oil and gas and coal and timber, all the natural resources of America, the wealth they produce, go into the public budget. And the second would be a mass mobilization of the population to build and to construct, mobilize new highways, new railroads, high-speed railway, new universities, new schools, mobilize people to go out and build and construct, give this country a high-tech makeover by hiring millions of unemployed and building, put banking and the credit purse strings under public ownership so the state can assign credit based on what will enable economic growth and economic expansion, with the public lending money strategically in the interest of the country, and ultimately enacting an economic bill of rights, ensuring that everyone has health care and education and employment, and not viewing these economic rights in terms of a handout, right? We're just giving these things to people, but rather as an investment. If we want to have a strong country, we need every human being's labor power to be utilized. Nobody should be unemployed because all that labor power needs to be utilized to build and construct, number one. Number 2, if we're going to have a strong country, we need the people to be smart. They need to have an education. We need engineers. We need scientists. We need people who can make an informed decision when they go to vote. And so we're going to need access to education for the population so that they can get educated and use their knowledge to generate more wealth. Talk about healthcare. The people of the country have got to be healthy physically. They got to be strong, physically fit. They got to be optimistic. They've got to have a long life expectancy. That's going to be necessary. And so an economic bill of rights is not a handout. It's not a gift that we just give to people out of the goodness of our heart. It's an investment in the nation. And that 4-point economic plan that is the basis of the Center for Political Innovation, it ultimately leads society into a confrontation with the big monopolies, the bankers, the huge oil companies, the ultra-rich monopolists that dominate the world. And it lays the basis for the beginning of a pro-growth, pro-humanity, anti-monopoly coalition. And that is what we ultimately need, an anti-monopoly coalition. A government of action that will fight for working families to ensure long-term economic growth by rationally controlling and planning the means of production so that growth is no longer restrained and limited by the irrationality of the profit-oriented system of production. That is ultimately what is needed, right? A government of action to fight for working families. That is what we need. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And a government of action can ensure long-term economic growth by planning the economy. And 21st century socialism is different than Soviet-style socialism. The Soviet Union had many great achievements. I will defend the Soviet Union as a society that invented space travel, that defeated the Nazis, that invented LED lights, that raised millions from poverty, that electrified the entire country, that brought health care to the entire country, that wiped out illiteracy, that built huge new universities. I will defend the huge amount of economic expansion and growth that happened in the Soviet Union. But I will also admit that in the 1980s, it was clear the Soviet Union needed to change. And the reforms that came about in China with the rise of Deng Xiaoping, those reforms were necessary in order to ensure economic growth. The market is something that can coexist with socialism. The market is necessary for the things that make life enjoyable, like clothing, like children's toys, like computer games, like new software programs. These things are important. But you cannot have profits in command. You need a government, a powerful government that can organize the economy and force the economy, the market sector and the public sector, to function in the overall interest of society at large. You must eliminate the profit motive as the basis for society, and you must create a society where you have a popular government with popular power that enables society to get wealthier and living standards to go up and the population to increase and technology to advance and a better life for all. That is what is needed. And I think about what we could do if we got over this hurdle of eliminating the irrationality of the market and what we could do with a government of action. You look at what a poor country like China has done, how they've become the second largest economy in the world, lifted 800 million people out of poverty. If you look at that, imagine what we could do in this country. I imagine that we would have a social media app that would make people smarter and stronger and more psychologically healthy, that would empower kids. Right now we have social media apps that destroy children psychologically, destroy their self-esteem, destroy relationships, tear apart families. We can do the opposite. We could have a social media app where the algorithms and everything is designed to make you a better person. We could do it. Instead of having a bunch of for-profit monopolies rigging the algorithms in order to advance their profits, we could have a government of action working in the interests of increasing the overall wealth of society, making people happier, making people more emotionally well, as Gabby would put it. We could, as a result of that, have a social media app that did such things. We could eliminate homelessness. We could ensure that every country had very high quality access. Every section of the country had very high quality access to Wi-Fi. We could make sure that no more of the roads falling apart. We could make sure that there was gainful employment for everybody. We could make the population smarter. We could build and construct. We could get beyond fossil fuels. All the environmental folks think that the answer to fossil fuels is windmills, solar panels. No, the answer to fossil fuels is fusion energy. It's reaching a higher fuel source, a higher level of energy flux density. We're not going to solve the problems of fossil fuels by going backward. We only solve problems by going forward and have great breakthroughs on the road to developing fusion energy. These are all things that could be done, but we need a government of action that will fight for working families in order to carry these things out. And the imperialists, their plan, their way out of the crisis is World War III and a low-wage police state. That's what they are thinking of doing. In order to save their system, they want to provoke an all-out confrontation with Russia, with China, with the Palestinians, with Venezuela, with Iran, with Cuba, with North Korea. And they want to force us to accept more and more poverty here at home. However, what we want is a government of action to beat back the power of monopolies and profiteers and instead rationally organize the economy, to empower the people. I can imagine that private companies would be part of this. I can imagine that worker cooperatives would be part of it. But ultimately, it would be about popular power, controlling the means of production, and organizing the economy to unleash productive forces and get rid of this contradiction, this situation where poverty is created by abundance. That is ultimately what we are trying to achieve. And it is the breakdown of capitalism in a crisis of overproduction that is driving Joe Biden to carry out his insane moves. Now, I want to bring my attention to what's been going on in the Red Sea lately. As you all know, I wrote this whole book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For?, explaining the Houthi movement, where they came from, and how the essence of the Houthi movement is some of the poorest people in what is, some people say, is the poorest country in the world, Yemen, fighting for their rights and fighting to seize control of their economy, their country's economy and its natural resources. And the Houthi movement that focuses on demanding economic development and asserting economic independence for Yemen, a religious movement of Shia Muslims who want to stand with the oppressed. The Houthi movement is now blocking ships in the Red Sea to support the Palestinians and oppose Israeli crimes. This situation is very important because it shows what popular power can do. I want to show you some of the pictures in our book on the Houthis. This is a Houthi summer camp in Yemen. Those are poor children, Yemeni children in the poorest country in the world from the mountains. They're there in their robes at the Houthi summer camp. And I'll show you another picture of Yemen. This is a Houthi rally in Yemen, and they've been having huge rallies lately. They've been getting every few days, they get 1 to 2 million people to gather for these huge rallies. And if you look at the Houthi movement is a great example of a mass popular movement. It's a religious movement. These people are Shia Muslims, and they have come together on the basis of their religion to demand economic development of their country, to stand in opposition to Israel, to stand in opposition to U.S. imperialism. And they have built a very popular movement, and now they are stopping the global economy, and they are attacking ships in the Red Sea and saying, no, until the Palestinians get some justice, until you stop killing the Palestinians, you shall not pass. These ships shall not pass until you stop killing the Palestinians. No one has done more to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians than the Houthis have. They are stopping the global maritime trade routes in order to demand justice for the Palestinians. These are the poorest people in the world, but they've built a mass movement. They have built a mass movement, and we need to build a mass movement in the United States. And mass movements have changed. When I go to anti-imperialist countries like Venezuela and Cuba and Iran, I see that things are not as they once were. In the Soviet Union, under Stalin's leadership, the Marxist-Leninist ideology, the single interpretation of it, was pretty much forced on the population overall. But when I go to Venezuela, I notice that Bolivarian socialism is very diverse. Amid Maduro's camp, there are many different leaders who interpret Bolivarian socialism in different ways. There's the Communist Party. There's the Fatherland for All Party. There are Christian socialists. There are Maoists. There are others. They built this movement in Venezuela that has different layers and components to it. When I go to Iran, in Iran, they have different political parties. They have different clerics and ayatollahs who interpret the Islamic Revolution and its goals differently, but they're all united around the program of the Islamic Revolution. And that 21st century socialism, in which an anti-colonial revolutionary government controls the means of production, in which the economy is organized to serve public good, in which there is a market sector, but it's controlled by the anti-colonial government that regulates and pushes growth, in which you have a well-organized population that see themselves as the enforcers of the revolution, whether it's the Basij councils of Iran, the Bolivarian circles of Venezuela, the Citizens' Power Councils of Nicaragua, the Chinese Communist Party with its 90 million members, somebody in every apartment building, that the basis of building a revolutionary government in our time is building a mass movement of the population that is somewhat diverse ideologically, but sees itself as empowering ordinary people in alliance with an anti-colonial government to achieve its goals. And as I look at that, I realize that there are some things we need to get over in the United States if we are going to build a mass movement, right? First of all, folks, I don't want to spread CPI's business on this stream, and I'm not going to. But right now in CPI, we're jumping over a hurdle. We are going to start doing mass outreach in a way we haven't done it before. The whole point of the Center for Political Innovation is out of the movement to the masses And unfortunately, we've been struggling to hold the group together. We've made great sacrifices. We've done great things. We've been a great network of people. We've had many conferences, but it's time to start doing it. It's time to start getting door knocker leaflets on doors. It is time to start getting palm cards out there. And it's time to change the culture of our organization internally to make sure that it happens. And this is a difficult hurdle, but CPI, our mission is out of the movement to the masses, and we have to just do it. We have to just do it. And so we are going through a somewhat, I don't know how difficult it's going to be, but we're biting the bullet. We are jumping the hurdle. It is time to start doing mass outreach. And that's difficult, right? Because, in a lot of ways, we've done great things holding the group together. I'm so proud of the work that we did for many important, anti-imperialist causes. The way we've stood in solidarity with the Uhuru is so important. And that's going to be part of the mass outreach we do, is raising awareness about the Uhuru case. I'm so proud of so much of what CPI has done, but we haven't yet started really fulfilling and carrying out our mission on a mass scale as we intend, right? We haven't been engaging in the mass outreach in the way that we should. And so we are in the process of fixing that. And as we do that, we are realizing as an organization, or at least I'm helping people to understand and encouraging people to understand that part of the reason that we engage in mass outreach and what is necessary in order to help us engage in mass outreach is we're going to have to embark on a journey of self-improvement, right? And that mass outreach means learning from the masses, but also teaching the masses. And the way that I'm able to do these live streams night after night is because I did mass outreach and I learned, right? I have the humility to admit that I learned. I didn't know all this stuff. There's a lot of older communists and a lot of people around the developing world who spent a lot of time with me to teach me what I know, to encourage me to read books in a certain way, to interpret what I read in a certain way, to encourage me to engage with the masses of people and have conversations in a certain way, to critique me. I've learned. And it takes humility to admit that you've learned, but I have learned. I am eternally grateful to a very crazy communist group I was around when I was in high school, because they saved my life, because they sent me out on the street to sell newspapers. And the first time they handed me a stack of communist newspapers, I was horrified. It was like, oh my God, you want me to just walk out on the street and walk up to people I don't even know and try to sell them a newspaper about communism and get them to give me actual money for it? And they said, yep. And I was terrified. I stuttered. I could barely get the words out, but I got better at it. And it was through engaging in outreach and talking to people I don't know and explaining my ideas and learning to relate to people and learning to listen to people and learning to explain things in a way that people could understand and becoming familiar with different people's experience that I learned. I've still got plenty to learn. I don't pretend that I know it all. We are constantly learning from the masses, and that is a journey of self-improvement. And, I would like you all to know how much I have improved myself by being part of a movement. And as we build a movement, we are on a journey of self-improvement. You learn from the masses. You learn by doing. If you want to change things, you got to learn things. If you want to learn things, you got to change things. Changing and learning are connected. You learn by changing things. You change things by learning things. And that we have to learn a mass campaign. We have to learn the art of doing this. And in order to do that, we need to get over two big hurdles. And I talked about this in a meeting we had tonight. One thing that is a big problem that we're adjusting in CPI is that we are not an internet fandom, right? Being a fandom is not desirable. There's all kinds of social media influencers out there. There's all kinds of people that are on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube talking about their lives or telling you about books or world events. And, to people who don't know, to people that are not in CPI, CPI looks like a fandom, because I've written a lot of the books, because, you know, I did start CPI and all of that. We need to really combat the idea that we are a fandom. We are not that. Fandoms aren't real organizations. Fandoms are a form of mass marketing and entertainment. Fandoms are a show that you watch on the internet. That's what social media influencers are. That's what fandoms are. Peter Coffin made a great film called Marks for Sale. Go and watch it, where he critiqued internet fandoms, right? And that a fandom is worthless because a fandom doesn't build a mass movement. A fandom is only temporary. Eventually, people just change the channel with fandoms. They have no reason to keep watching, right? We need to do everything we can to reinvent our image so we do not look like a fandom. That is the first thing. We need to make clear to people that we are a real organization where people have real relationships with each other, where there are disagreements, where there are community activities, where people make friends and bond. We need to communicate effectively to the world that we're not a fandom. And right now, because people don't know, right? If you just walked onto this stream, you might think that we're just some fandom because I have a social media thing and I'm on here streaming. Well, we're not a fandom. But at the same time that we fight against fandom, we also have to fight against Khrushchevism, because Khrushchevism is a cancer. It's a cancerous brain worm that has been inserted into our society. The Khrushchev secret speech that set the stage for destroying the Soviet Union, that speech killed more people than any other speech in history. That speech led to the Soviet Union and China dividing. That speech led to the fall of the Eastern Bloc. That speech led to so much devastation and suffering. Khrushchev's secret speech that he gave after the death of Stalin, the speech that the phrase cult of personality comes from, is the most evil speech in history. With that speech, communism as a mass movement deteriorated around the world. The Soviet people, who had sacrificed so much and defeated the Nazis and invented space travel, were demoralized, were led to believe that the man at the top was a cynical, power-hungry grifter. And it was devastating. And the secret speech is a big part of liberal culture. It's a big part of liberal culture. Liberal culture wants you to constantly be on guard for cult of personality, constantly be on guard. And there are various manifestations of Khrushchevism. One manifestation of Khrushchevism is resentment against leaders. Look, maybe, if you want to be popular, become a leader of the Democratic Party. You want to be popular, become the leader of the Republican Party. But if you want to be popular in America, if you're just in it for the money and the fame, do not become a communist. Do not become an anti-imperialist. Don't, right? The idea that somebody starts an anti-imperialist group or starts a communist group or becomes an outspoken defender of North Korea and Iran because they just want to feed their own ego, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. However, that's a brain worm that is planted in people's heads. What's another manifestation of Khrushchevism? Being afraid to identify with the group because you want to be thought of as thinking for yourself, right? You can think for yourself inside of an organization. No one's going to think for you. But being afraid to tell people that you're a member of an organization, being afraid to hand out leaflets for your organization because people might not think you are an individual who thinks for yourself, that is Khrushchevism. That is a brain worm. It's got to be opposed. Another thing that is a manifestation of Khrushchevism, being unwilling to tell your coworkers or your friends or your family that you're a member of an organization. That's Khrushchevism. There's nothing shameful about being a member of the Center for Political Innovation or any other anti-imperialist group that you might be in. But this idea of losing the image that you think for yourself, that you're independent, that's got to be opposed. Another manifestation of Khrushchevism, refusing to admit that you've learned anything, having a prideful attitude. I knew it all. I knew it all. No one taught me anything. That's Khrushchevism. We are all learning. I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't learned, if I hadn't been pushed to do things I didn't know I was capable of doing, if I hadn't been challenged, if I hadn't been told I was, we're all learning. I learn every day. I learn from there's people in this chat who've taught me plenty. You have to be willing to admit that you learn, and you have to be open to learning. And if you think you know it all, or you have to pretend that you know it all out of fear of being embarrassed, right? That is a big problem. And the other thing is not admitting who taught it to you. I admit that the communist group that I was in when I was a teenager that was very wacky, they saved my life by teaching me to do outreach. And I can admit that, right? And, these are important things. And, we obviously believe in open debate. We obviously believe in people's right to disagree. We obviously believe in people's right to question things. We obviously, don't believe that anyone in our group has superpowers or anything like that. But the Khrushchev secret speech, I encourage everyone who's watching this, go and read it for yourself, but read it knowing that Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech is the voice of Satan. That is what Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech is. When you read the secret speech of Nikita Khrushchev, you are reading the voice of the devil. You are reading the voice that destroyed the global communist movement. You are reading the speech that resulted in millions of deaths across Eastern Europe, that set back global anti-colonial movements, that demoralized and devastated and destroyed the Communist Party USA, that led millions of people to turn away from the global movement that they had sacrificed for, a speech that caused people to commit suicide. When you read Khrushchev's secret speech, that is Satan. That is what the devil sounds like. So go and read the speech, and if you hear somebody talking that way, someone who's determined to prove, we are not a cult, I think for myself, if you hear somebody talking like Khrushchev, they need to be corrected. They need to be taught. They need to be told that that is the voice of Satan, right? Khrushchev was a Trotskyist. Khrushchev was destructive. And ultimately, what Khrushchev was doing was he was appealing to people's Oedipal impulses. This is very interesting. We all have different impulses, and they're all necessary. One impulse that we all have is called parental transference. We love our parents. When you're a baby, if your parents don't feed you and change your diapers and take care of you, you will die. Your parents are very, very important. And the first relationship that you ever have in your life is with your parents. And so it is common that people will go through life and take the experiences that they had with their parents and the feelings that they have for their parents and project them onto other role models. That's very common. Teachers, mentors, older brothers, older sisters, people you look up to and admire will take on the role of a parent. And that's good. But it can also be a problem if your parent was abusive, if your parent, if you're desperate, if your parent didn't give you love and you're desperate for love. There are ways that parental transference can be abused, but ultimately it's healthy because you need your parents. But what Khrushchev was doing, he was not appealing to parental transference. Khrushchev was appealing to people's Oedipal impulses. Now, the Oedipus complex, it comes from an ancient Greek play about a guy who kills his father and marries his mother. And basically, the Oedipal impulse is that especially young men, but young women too, as you get older, you fight with your parents. And you have to prove as a young person that you are not your parents' property. You will think independently of your parents. Your parents, you're becoming an adult. You're not their property. They can't tell you what to do. And as you're a teenager, you develop more and more Oedipal feelings, right? You want to prove to your parents that they can't control you, that they can't tell you what to do, that you're independent. You want to go out on your own and have your own life. And that's important. You need your Oedipal drive. It's very, very important to have an Oedipal drive. If you don't have it, You're going to, they talk about failure to launch, people who never grow up and all of that. You need an Oedipal drive, right? And that's very important. But what Khrushchevism is a manipulation of all of our basic Oedipal drives in order to destroy the ability to organize as a revolutionary. It is a brainworm that is implanted into your head. Oh my God, that person's teaching everybody stuff and organizing a revolutionary movement. I got to prove that they're not in charge. I don't want to look like I follow them. That is toxic. And we, as an organization, we are in a culture where, all these feelings are all around us. Oedipal feelings are all around us. Parental these feelings are all there. But our culture, in order to maintain control and prevent a mass movement from arising, has amped up Oedipal feelings, the distortion and the manipulation of the Oedipus complex, has amped up Khrushchevism everywhere. We've got where everyone's terrified to join a mass movement. Everyone's terrified to believe in right and wrong, to idealize and look up to important figures. Everyone's terrified of identifying with a group. It's toxic. And you can't survive as an organization unless you consciously say from day one, we reject Khrushchevism. And there are ways to train one's mind to oppose Khrushchevism. Number one, icons. All right? If you go to the Eastern countries around the world, this is an image that you will see. All right? If you go to Russia, look at this woman. This woman's got a picture of Stalin with a halo on his head. Stalin was an atheist. Why does she have an image with Stalin on his halo on his head? Well, in the Russian Orthodox Church for thousands of years, they've had the tradition of having icons, saints, images of saints that they look up to, because they believe that looking up to saints, looking up to Jesus, looking up to great individuals in the history of the Christian faith is healthy, and they're right. And in China and in Korea, they have traditions of ancestor worship. And all these things are important because these are pushing back against Khrushchevism. And Khrushchevism says that's wrong, says that it's wrong to have a picture of someone you idealize. There are no heroes. Everyone's a fraud. Everyone's a phony. So if you want to fight against Khrushchevism, you need to find a great communist leader or a great historical figure that you look up to, and you need to have an icon. You need to have a picture of some great historical figure in your bedroom, in your office. You need to have that picture. And you need to look at that picture. And as you live your life, you need to look at Rosa Luxemburg, look at William Z. Foster, look at Gus Hall, look at Stalin, look at Mao, look at Martin Luther King Jr., look at Huey Newton, look at Fred Hampton, and think, how would they talk to me if I consulted them about how I'm living right now? How would they feel about what I'm doing now? Doesn't mean that they are absolutely right, but you need to have the psychological relationship with an icon, right? You need to push back on the Khrushchevite tendency that says we don't have anyone to look up to. There's one of the best interviews that Deng Xiaoping gave. He told a journalist, "We will never do to Mao what Khrushchev did to Stalin. We are critical of Mao, but Mao's picture will always be in Tiananmen Square in China. And we will never do to Khrushchev or do to Stalin. We will never do to Mao what Khrushchev did to Stalin, because it devastated the Soviet people psychologically." And it's very important that you fight any Khrushchevist tendencies, because our culture and Netflix and everything is constantly bombarding people with Khrushchevism. And if you're going to be part of an organization, and if you're going to challenge yourself, you have to actively push back against your own Khrushchevite tendencies. Not by becoming a fan, not by engaging in fandom, by being involved in a real revolutionary movement, by having ideals to look up to. And there are other things one can do to oppose their own Khrushchevist tendencies. Challenge yourself. Make a commitment to yourself of things you're going to do and live up to your commitment. Have your friend hold you accountable. Say to your friend, you know what? This week I'm going to get out 100 flyers. And have your friend check in with you a couple times a week to make sure you actually get out that 100 flyers. Make promises to yourself and fulfill them. Meditate. Be more spiritual. All of these are things you can do to push back on Khrushchevism. But if our organization is going to stay together, and if you're going to have any organization in our time, you must push back against all manifestations of both fandom and Khrushchevism. An organization that's just made up of people who want to watch somebody on the internet and be entertained by them is not a revolutionary organization. And an organization that is actually organizing will be pulled apart unless it actively fights Khrushchevism. You need an icon. Get yourself some icons. Start making promises to yourself that you can fulfill. Start challenging yourself about what you can do. Work with your friends to have them help you achieve your accomplishments, right? And I got to tell you, the main way that you will improve as a revolutionary is by doing outreach, is by talking to people you do not know about communism and winning them to agree with you. And it's hard. It's very hard to do. But you only learn it by doing, right? If you've not told your parents or your brother or your sister or your spouse that you are part of the city building tendency in CPI, you got to tell them that. If you've never handed out a leaflet before or a flyer before, you got to start doing it. And, it's about getting the word out, but it's also about you improving as a revolutionary and de-Khrushchevizing, right? This is a moment. Well, I'll show you my icons. I've got Malcolm X in my living room alongside William Z. Foster, alongside Lenin and Stalin. My wife and I had to compromise about who would be on the wall. I've got icons. I certainly do have icons. And, there are ways of actively combating Khrushchevism. But if you want to build an organization, you have to fight against Khrushchevism. So ultimately what we need a mass movement in this country. And CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, doesn't make sense without a mass movement. Right? Look, right now, CPI, we're a great group of people and we've accomplished a lot. But we're kind of an internet niche at this time, right? We're kind of an internet niche. That's what we are. And if we're going to be an internet niche, we should operate very differently, right? If we're going to be an internet niche, we should try to be obscure. We should say things in ways that are confusing to people. We're not trying to do that. Our whole approach with American flags, with the 4-point plan, everything we do is designed to be mass-oriented, to reach ordinary people who've never heard this stuff before. And so if we don't start using it for that purpose, it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, if we wanted to build an internet fandom or an internet niche community, we should be doing it very differently, right? We should have obscure symbols no one's ever heard of. We should have weird in talk that people can understand. And we make a point of not doing any of those things. We intend to be a mass-oriented movement. And in order to work, we have to be a mass-oriented movement. It doesn't work, right? If you want to build a fandom or a niche community, you talk one way, but our entire way of being Our entire way of being is based on not being that way. Our entire way of being is designed to have a mass appeal. So we have to start using it in that way, or else it's not going to work. And, you know, I tell people that CPI, it's kind of like we're kind of like a dancer. I use this analogy. We're kind of like a dancer. Imagine that you're a dancer or a gymnast. You're very good at dancing. You're very good at gymnastics. But in order to get ahead, there's a move that you have to learn. A new move you have to learn that's very difficult. It's a very difficult move. But if you don't learn it, you're going to be frozen at your athletic development. You just have to learn this move. In order to be a better dancer, you're going to have to learn this move. And it's not fun and it's not difficult. It's going to be painful. You're going to fail the first few times you try, but you got to do it. That's kind of where we're at, right? We have intended to be an outreach-oriented organization. Some people in our group, like Christina, have really worked very hard to do outreach. There's certainly other people that have done it, but we have to start doing the outreach. And there's a lot of people who've worked very, very hard and are working very, very hard to make this happen. And there are goals that need to be set. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about such things, but ultimately, right, we need to de-Khrushchevize the organization. We need to internally orient people against Khrushchevism. We need to actively combat the perception that we are a fandom, which unfortunately is a widely held perception. If I wasn't part of the group, if I just looked at it from a distance, I might think it was a fandom. We've got to change our image so we are not perceived as a fandom. We have to de-Khrushchevize and be on guard against Khrushchevite tendencies. And we have to start engaging in mass outreach. And that is what we're doing, right? And we have done great things. We came into existence. We were attacked viciously, and we recovered from that attack. And 2023 was the year of the comeback. And 2024, we've already accomplished a lot with the World Youth Festival, the Vermont Retreat, and a lot of things. But as we head toward 2025, the great hurdle we need to leap over is changing our culture and changing our organization to be really putting into practice out of the movement to the masses, really doing it. That's what we got to do. And so that's what's on my mind for tonight as we face the madness of imperialism and decay. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and let's do the roll call. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. After that, I will answer people's super chat questions. Bob in Troy, New York. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Yes, I have looked into Peronismo. Eric in Holland. Welcome, Eric. Jenny in Cincinnati. Leon in Argentina. Chad in Spokane, Washington. Seasoned noob in China. Ryan in Kansas City. Crow from Cali. David Crow, the van. David Crow is famous in California. He's known as the van. Alex in Brazil. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Jason in Manitoba. Joe from Snow Hill, North Carolina. Omar. Rachel Winkle in Georgia. Luca in Singapore. Master Jack in South Africa. You're on the list. Shantri in Mexico. Kieran from Old Town, London. Kakalaki, Sweden. Harold Dogbottom in Kakalaki. St. Joseph, Missouri. John McCarthy in Chicago. Steve and Ann in Georgia. Jorge in Europa Valley. Tomas in Malaysia. Here in Argentina. Ian Foster in Chester, England. Dan Niswander in Los Angeles area. Russia, lost in time. Victorville in the high desert of California. Morrissey in Jersey. Welcome, 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 welcome. Denver, Mosen. Cyrus in Cornwall. Patrick in Maine, Anthony in Detroit. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Seneca Valley, South Carolina. Very good. All right, folks. Now it's the time in the show where I answer your super chat questions. So super chats, Dustin Schlesinger from Cleveland, Keith from Hamilton, Ontario. Super chat questions are important, and they are not just important in terms of giving me something to talk about, though they are the second half of the show. Y'all make it happen. Super chat questions are also very, very important in terms of supporting me and my ability to maintain, this 2-bedroom apartment in New York City. And you don't want to know what my rent is and, support this channel. There's other ways to support the channel by joining the Patreon, by buying some of our books, etc. But super chats help make this channel happen. And so on that note, I'm going to start answering questions. Caleb, will you watch that shit show debate, Trump-Biden? I will do my best to watch it, Gala, and do a reaction stream afterwards. That is my plan for tomorrow night. I do have a job that may require me to do other things. I may get pulled in some different directions. My plan at the moment is to watch the debate and do a reaction stream afterwards. April and Chris in Salt Lake City, Alberta, Canada, Santos, Bulgaria, Grapentine, Florida. So hopefully, Gala, you'll be watching me do a reaction stream to the debate tomorrow night. Why are they doing the debate this early? They're only doing 2, and they're doing 1 now and 1 in September. This doesn't make any sense. Something's off. Right? This is a very strange election. All right. Who is Genrik Yagoda? I don't know. I have not heard that name before, but since you super chatted me, I will Google it. Genrik Yagoda was a secret police official who served as the director of the NKVD under Stalin's leadership. Okay. All right. Right. I know he's the guy who replaced Yezhov after Yezhov was arrested. Okay. Yeah. So Yezhov was the leader of the secret police during what they call the Great Terror. 1936, 1937, there were a lot of arrests in the Soviet Union. A lot of innocent people, got arrested during those years. It was very awful. There was mass panic because there was sabotage going on and they feared Nazi spies and people were turning in their neighbors. It was awful. Yezhov was the leader of the secret police during the Great Terror of 1936-37. That's why they call it Yezhovshchina in Russia, or Yezhov's fear, or whatever. And Yezhov was eventually executed by Stalin for his role in that period. And look, I do not approve of gulag jokes at all. No one should be making gulag jokes. Gulag jokes are not funny. A lot of innocent people ended up in gulags. They shouldn't have been there. Gulags, they weren't concentration camps like the Nazis had. There were no gas chambers in gulags, but they were still awful places. And it's not funny. And a lot of innocent people who didn't deserve it ended up in them. And, we can admit that while the Soviet Union had great achievements during Stalin's years, defeating the Nazis, inventing space travel, electrifying the country, wiping out illiteracy, empowering women, etc. There was 1936, 1937, there was a mass episode of repression that was very awful, right? And the population had been through 15 countries invading them after the Russian Revolution. There was mass trauma in the country, from war and devastation. And the population was very afraid. And they industrialized rapidly, but that pain and trauma of those wars was not over. And if you want to blame it on Stalin personally, you're oversimplifying things, right? I think Fidel Castro has a speech where he says blaming Stalin is historical simplism. Right, in this narrative that evil Stalin was just sitting up there, I will kill these people. No, there was trauma among the population. And after the assassination of Sergei Kirov, the Soviet official was killed, and it looked like there was a wider conspiracy in order to kill them. There was mass fear in the country. So there you go. How can we deal with the lumpen proletariat after the revolution? Well, after the revolution, there will be full employment. So they will all have jobs. They will have access to education. If you're referring to criminals specifically, that's a different question. But the term lumpen proletariat, it refers to people that are part of the working class technically, but they are never able to really hold on to a regular job. And they tend to exist by swindling people, by engaging in criminal activities, by engaging in, in organized crime, or they just exist as desperately poor people. The lumpen proletariat, you think of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, you think of drug dealers, you think of, in New York City every day, there are very, very poor people who don't speak English, who go around going through everyone's garbage looking for the plastic, right? Looking for the plastic and glass bottles and collecting them so they can sell them. Well, those people, they're workers. They're working for that money, right? And they're taking it back to a house or something, but they're living in extreme levels of poverty. They're living on, the term lumpen proletariat refers to those who maintain a marginal existence. That's, the people, the homeless people in the encampments in Los Angeles, people who maintain a marginal existence under capitalism. They're not able to really be fully part of the working class because of their marginal existence. That's what's called the lumpen proletariat. And Marx specifically warned against organizing the lumpen proletariat because their desperation leads them to where they will just they'll work for anybody who's paying them, right? Because they're desperate to survive. And often the lumpen proletariat are strike breakers. When there's a strike, they'll be brought in as scab labor, or they'll be brought in as thugs to break up the picket line, because that's what they are. And that ultimately we want a movement among the bulk of society, right? The vast majority of working class people are not lumpen. During the 1960s and 70s, Huey Newton and the Black Panthers, they kind of redefined lumpen to mean black. Yes, Tony Soprano was lumpen. They kind of redefined, lumpen to mean black people. Well, that's not true. Most black people are workers, right? They get lower wages than white workers do for the most part. They face discrimination, but they're workers. They sell their labor power. They get a wage. They pay their mortgage. They pay their rent. They spend money. Most black people are workers. Yes, there are criminal elements in the black community, just like in the white community, just like in the Asian community, and the Latino community, But the idea that black people as a race are lumpenized, that is not accurate. And that is a distortion of Marx's concept of the lumpen proletariat that became popular during the 1960s. And there became a fetish for the lumpen proletariat among the Weathermen and the New Left, Franz Fanon, Franz Fanon, Regis Debray, and a lot of these New Left thinkers had this fantasy that the lumpen proletariat, because they were violent and because they had guns and they lived on the margins of society, they were the real revolutionaries. And that is some New Left delusion. And actually the lumpen proletariat tend to, be strike breakers. They tend to, they'll beat up people that are, there'll be mobs of lumpen elements are used by Bonapartists in order to seize power. The writing on the lumpen proletariat that Marx talks about them the most is Eight Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, which is this piece where he talks about how Louis Bonaparte became a dictator by assembling a big mob of lumpen proletarians to storm the government buildings. And, that the ruling class will build mobs of lumpen proletarians, and use them for their own ends and all of that. But ultimately, the goal is to build a mass movement among the bulk of society, among the wage earning class, the wealth and value producing layer of society. After the revolution, obviously, I think there will still be laws, there will still be courts. People who rob people or people who beat up people or sexually assault people or whatever will be held accountable. But as far as a layer of people that are reduced to criminality and marginal existence, being part of society, that won't exist. That will be eliminated. What happened, Caleb? What's on the thumbnail? Well, earlier I talked about it. That was the beach in Sevastopol. where these Russian folks were on the beach and suddenly there was cluster munitions falling on them. It's utterly horrendous. I showed the video. And if that happened on Miami Beach, we would go to war with whatever country did it. But the U.S. government supplied Ukraine with ATACMS missiles. And as a result, 5 people died on a beach, including children. People, and there was, Russians running away from the beach. They're enjoying the beach, and they ran away because there were, munitions falling on them. Utterly horrendous. I mean, how the USA thinks that enabling Ukraine to just murder people this way is acceptable. So there you go. That's what happened. That was the events in Sevastopol. I did talk about what happened. There was an attempted coup today in Bolivia. It looks like the military were trying to depose the president. As the president, is kind of pivoting closer to Russia and China. Evo Morales, the former socialist president of Bolivia, announced that he's going to run for president. He's going to run for president, and Evo Morales may be back in power. And so the military moved against the Bolivian government today, but it appears they failed. But it ain't over till it's over. Let's just wait and see what happens. But there was some kind of attempted coup. They did have a coup in Bolivia when Evo Morales tried to run for re-election. The election to re-elect him was stopped, but then they had an election. The socialists got back in, but it wasn't Evo Morales, and it was kind of a compromised government, that got back in Bolivia. But it looks like Evo Morales may be back in power again, and that's what the military is trying to prevent. Evo Morales was and remains a genuine anti-imperialist, right? Evo Morales, he was elected, and he, nationalized the national resources of Bolivia. He paved the roads. He wiped out illiteracy. He brought in Cuban doctors. And Evo Morales, he supports Russia and Ukraine, and he stands with China on the issue of Taiwan. And he was overseeing the process of enabling China to work with the Bolivian government to utilize their lithium resources to build up their economy. And he had a very skilled economist who was his economic advisor, and the USA overthrew him. And Elon Musk bragged about it, said, "Oh, we can coup anyone we want," or whatever. And now that, and then there was, first the military removed him. Then after that, you had, a socialist government elected, but it was like a compromise between the synthetic left and the supporters of Morales. But now it appears that in the upcoming election, Evo Morales is going to run again, and he'll probably win. And because of that, the military is trying to overthrow the government and prevent the election from taking place. And that's what happened. One thing that I often point out to people, when Evo Morales was the president of Bolivia, Bolivia had the highest rates of GDP growth in Latin America. And like even the Washington Post and, many mainstream outlets have admitted this. There was huge amounts of, there's an article from 2019, Bolivia's remarkable success story. They always want to blame all the problems of Venezuela on socialism. But when a socialist, Marxist, communist was running Bolivia, he had the highest rate of GDP growth in all of South America. You can read about it in The Nation. They never tell you that. They never tell you that because that doesn't fit their narrative about communism just doesn't work anywhere. Funny, Russia and China became superpowers. It just doesn't work, right? Libya had the highest life expectancy, the most prosperous African country under Gaddafi's leadership. No, it just doesn't work anywhere. It's, they cherry pick things to feed that narrative. So yeah. I saw the Jimmy Dore show. Candace Owens went on to accuse the Bolsheviks of genociding the Christians in the Gulag. What's up with that? Well, there was heavy repression of the Christian church in the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, because the church in Russia, you have to remember that the church was the state. The Tsar was also like the Pope. He was the head of the church. And they were, peasants were overthrowing their landlords and redistributing the land. And the church was seen as an institution that had propped up feudalism. Obviously, I will absolutely say that a lot of what went on was wrong. But the Gulag thing, that wasn't that. The Gulag thing, that was later. The Gulag, most of the people who were in Gulags were convicted of regular crimes like murder or theft or rape or whatever. There were people put in the Gulags for political reasons in the Great Terror of 1936, 37, etc. But the idea that they just rounded up all the Christians and put them in Gulags, it's actually Stalin who brought back the Russian Orthodox Church. And if you watch the movie, One of my favorite movies is Ivan the Terrible, which is a great Russian movie about a czar who unified Russia and defeated foreign invaders, called Ivan the Terrible. It's a movie made by Stalin, and it's all about Russian Orthodox imagery. There's all kinds of Russian Orthodox prayers and all of that in the movie. And Stalin brought back the Russian Orthodox Church, and Stalin himself went to seminary school. There's actually a biography of Stalin that I recommend. The best book on Stalin that I've ever read. I mean, in terms of knowing who the man actually was, is this book Young Stalin. I have a copy of Young Stalin around here somewhere. It's probably on the table. I've waved it around on these streams before. Yeah, here it is. Young Stalin. If you want to know who Stalin actually was, Simon Sebag Montefiore is this very, very conservative, aristocratic British politician. And because he's so conservative and no one would ever call him a communist, he wrote this book, Young Stalin. And if you read this book, you will learn that Stalin was a brilliant mass organizer, that Stalin was a very, very effective leader. But on top of that, you'll also learn that Stalin was very, very Christian in his approach, and that Trotsky complained about the fact that many of the Bolsheviks who were recruited by Stalin didn't know that the Bolshevik Party was atheistic. They thought that the communist movement was a truly Christian movement because that's how Stalin explained it to them. Stalin went to seminary school, and basically, if you read it, he talks about Stalin being a dynamic young preacher, who had a very Christian and Christian appeal in his socialistic rhetoric. Candace Owens is right in a sense. There was, the Russian Orthodox Church was outlawed, church property was confiscated. There were, priests that were killed. The Orthodox buildings were bombed. These things happened, but they happened most especially during the time of Trotsky. Right? This happened during the early years of the revolution, before the rise of Stalin. During those years, the Trotskyites all love, I mean, that's one thing I will tell you about Trotskyites that just makes my head shake, right? The early years of the Soviet Union were awful, okay? The early years of the Soviet Union, right? The Bolsheviks come to power. They get invaded. The Russian Civil War, 15 countries invade them. They're blockaded. They can't get medicine. The early 1920s, 1921, 1922, 1923, those years were bad. Those were bad years. And in fact, there's one of the translations of the Soviet national anthem recorded by Paul Robeson. And the verses are, through days dark and stormy, while great Lenin led us, our eyes saw the bright sun of freedom for all, and Stalin, our leader, with faith in the people. So why is it through days dark and stormy? The years when Lenin was running the Soviet Union were not good years. People were dying, people were suffering, etc. Now, that doesn't make Lenin bad. And that's why a lot of Russians don't like Lenin. Stalin is quite popular in Russia these days. Lenin, not so much. The people who like Lenin in Russia tend to be communists. But a lot of Russians who are not communists like Stalin. They view him as a great leader of the nation. Lenin is only liked by communists. Communists like Lenin, but non-communists in Russia don't generally like Lenin. And they don't like him because of the fact that his time was a pretty bad time, and he gave up a lot of their territory, etc. At Brest-Litovsk, at the treaty, and that there's a lot of criticism of Lenin these days. Things in Russia started getting better under the Stalin years. Lenin said before he died, communism is Soviet power plus electrification. And it was Stalin who electrified the Soviet Union, built power plants, etc. Trotskyites, and this is beyond me, Trotskyites say, oh, things were great during the Lenin years. Under Stalin, they were bad. And it's like, in the Lenin years, they were invaded. In the Lenin years, it was a disaster. It was Stalin who industrialized the place. It was Stalin who made it a modern country. It's like they got it ass backwards. I think Lenin's intentions were good. I think that Lenin laid the basis for what Stalin did. But the time when Lenin was running Russia were not good. And, Stalin is the guy who actually improved things. But Trots don't like Stalin because U.S. media told him that he's a dictator. But they think Lenin was good because the books that were published during those years agree with them. I mean, the language in the books, it's permanent revolution. And that's the thing, the heavy repression and the vengeance that was exacted against the Russian Orthodox Church. It was horrendous. It was absolutely wrong. Most of that happened under Lenin's leadership. Most of that happened during the early years when Trotsky was still in the government, when they were very much, and, many people view Stalin, and, Stalin really solidified his leadership of the USSR in 1927, 1928. Many people view Stalin as actually incorporating a lot of elements of Russian Orthodox culture into the Soviet state, like icons, right? Stalin invented the term Marxism-Leninism, and he put Lenin in a mausoleum, and preserved his body so people could look at it. That was something that was associated with saints in the Russian Orthodox Church. In the Russian Orthodox Church, it was believed that the body of a saint did not decompose as rapidly as the body of a regular person. And so by preserving Lenin's body and putting it in a tomb, that was basically subtly saying Lenin is a saint, or Lenin is a holy person, because we're preserving his body. Stalin kind of played the role of a czar. He was the leader at the top who was encouraging everyone to work really, really hard. And that the Soviet state, there were elements of the imagery of the Soviet state, of the aesthetics of the Soviet state, that drew heavily from Russian Orthodox traditions. Stalin also outlawed gay marriage. There was no gay marriage. He outlawed homosexuality. He outlawed abortion. Stalin gave medals to women who had more than 10 children. They were considered to be a mother of the Soviet Union, right? And so when Trotskyites say that the Lenin years were good and the Stalin years were bad, that's very self-exposing. It shows they don't really care about people. They care about their ideology, etc. But anyway, the heaviest repression of the Orthodox Church happened in the immediate years. It was Stalin that re-legalized the Russian Orthodox Church and made a very Russian Orthodox film during the Second World War that basically is full of scenes of priests and praying and all kinds of stuff. It's called Ivan the Terrible. It's a very, very Russian Orthodox film that he made during the war. Here, I'll show you a couple clips from the movie. And then Khrushchev, after Stalin's death, Khrushchev did a very heavy round of repression of the Russian Orthodox Church. But I think, though, let's not pretend that Stalin's record with the Russian Orthodox Church was clean. It wasn't. It was certainly not clean. He did bad things to the Russian Orthodox Church as well. And that the oppression of religion under communist governments is a black mark in communism's history. It was wrong. And I've explained it many times this way, right? And I believe God was using communists to do that, right? And I believe that it was part of God's plan in a weird way, because the Catholic Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, religion in general under feudalism is very corrupted. Nowadays you can pick your own religion, right? You can be a Baptist or a Muslim or a Catholic or a Scientologist or whatever you want to be. Feudalism, it's not like that. In a feudal society, there is one church, the government church, and that church says, obey your landlord, obey the king, because God put him in power. And if you question that church, you get burned at the stake or you get killed. And if you're a peasant who's been oppressed under that kind of system, you're going to see that as very corrupt. And, the church is used as a mechanism, a corrupt mechanism, to order you to obey earthly authorities for the benefit of earthly authorities. That's how feudalism exists. And it was the same under Buddhist feudalism in Tibet. And it was the same under Shinto feudalism in Japan. Feudalism, a system where you have serfs and landowners, peasants and landowners, kings, nobles. That's one stage of development. And under that stage of development, kind of totalitarian religion is used to keep people in their place. And, people don't like that. People generally don't like that. Well, when people don't like a system and they rise up against it, They tend to destroy institutions associated with it. And I would argue that in order to connect with the higher truth and in order to connect with the real God, you have to destroy the false barrier that gets in the way, right? And, you know, I've talked about, you know, one of my favorite writers is Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish romantic. And he talks about, why did all the great prophets of ancient times, why did they always destroy idols? Why? What was going on there? Now, do we believe that ancient people were just so stupid that they thought that, you know, they could carve a piece of wood in their backyard and that was God? No. Those idols were originally erected to stand for real truths and principles. But after time, those idols became routine. They became things that people worshiped or they bowed before, and they became abused and symbols of earthly corruption. And the prophet returns to earth to smash the idols in order to enable mankind to reconnect with the real truth and with the real God. And that I argue that communism and radicalism, leftism, the French Revolution, all of this was used. It was anti-religious because there was idolatry going on. The Catholic Church of France at the time of the French Revolution was not enabling people to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. It was enabling the king to rule over people. It was enabling the landlords to oppress the peasants. And people were never going to connect with God if God was presented to them through a corrupt earthly institution. That's the point. That is the point. And so the corrupt earthly institution had to be swept away. And it was done in a way that was brutal and awful. And there was a lot of suffering and it wasn't right. But what we have now is a world where people do have the freedom to connect with God. And people do have the ability to connect with real spiritual forces. And if we had some state church that was super corrupt ruling over all of us, we wouldn't have that ability. Right? If a corrupt institution speaking in the name of God was forced on all of us, if America had a state religion that was very corrupt and said Joe Biden was appointed to rule over you by God, so shut up and obey him or else you get burned at the stake, none of us would be religious. None of us would connect with God because God would be identified with a corrupt earthly institution that we didn't even have the freedom to disagree with. So God had to get rid of that institution. The idol had to be smashed. But now that the idol has been smashed, now that people can be atheists if they want, people can be whatever they want, we can reconnect. And that's a great thing. And I think that God manipulated Satan's energy a little bit, and God tricked Satan into clearing out corrupt institutions and paving the way for God to reassert himself and reconnect with mankind. And that's beautiful. And that's the brilliance of God. It's some heavenly jujitsu, right? Jujitsu is where you use your enemy's strength against them. And I think God very much needed for the corrupt institutions that ruled in the name of religion and the feudal order to be swept away. And so there was a lot of satanic energy that was unleashed in order to do that, to pave the way for what we now have. All right. 8.1 billion people in the world. On your recent live stream, I met two people who live a walking distance from me. Free Palestine. Well, you know, that may have to do with algorithms, my friend. That may relate to algorithms. I know stuff shows up in people's feeds based on where other people are watching and stuff. I mean, look, YouTube is a very weird thing. If I didn't live in New York City, this YouTube channel probably would not be as big. If I didn't live in New York City, but I do live in New York City, and because I live in New York City, this YouTube channel gets more views because there's a denser population here. There's really weird aspects of the algorithm that don't even make any sense, right? Like I've noticed that if I film a video in Russia and I take it all the way back to the United States and I edit it and I post it in America, YouTube picks up on it and suppresses the video. Now, how the fuck does that work? It's still me, but YouTube somehow knows that I filmed it in Russia, that this footage came from my personal American phone in Russia. And so when I post it, for some reason, it never shows up in people's feeds. That is damn weird. It's very, very damn weird, but it happens, right? And look, I'm not going to go into a great rant about algorithmic suppression, right? Look, part of the reason we need to do outreach is because the internet is rigged, and you all know that, right? And I'm glad you all are here and that you found our community despite, algorithmic suppression. But algorithmic suppression is getting worse and worse every day. And if we part of why we need to do Out of the Movement to the Masses is we're not, first of all, online recruiting. You meet some good people through online recruiting. A lot of great people watching right now that we met through online recruiting. I love you. But on top of that, there's a lot of people. There is a lot of people in you meet through online recruiting who, again, they just want a fandom. They want someone to entertain them. We need to build a real community, and we need to recruit people on the basis of joining a community, not on the basis of just wanting to watch me and be entertained. That's one thing. The other thing is that, algorithmic suppression, it's going to, that was the point. What was the other thing, right? Is that, the people you meet, but algorithmic suppression is going to get worse, and we just can't depend on internet outreach. I don't know what point I was making. I'm sorry. I got distracted. I was reading what people were saying in the chat. But anyway, that's probably not a coincidence, Omar. That's what I'm telling you, right? If you watch something, it is way more likely to show up in your neighbor's feed. It is right. I mean, and I get random people on here who just happen to be New York City people. They live in New York and they see me. I'm a streamer in New York, and somehow I end up in their feed. That's been happening for a while. So I don't think that's a coincidence. Keep in mind that there's no person who's watching you. I mean, there might be, but it's unlikely there's a person watching you. But there's AI run by marketing firms watching you all the time, right? If you're on Facebook, there's an AI device program in Facebook that is calculating and tracking your every move and using it to develop marketing mechanisms, right? If you go on Google, every Google search you make, there's no person who's sitting there going, oh, Caleb Googled trees today. It's not like that. There's no individual person, but there's an AI program that is taking note of the fact that Caleb Googled trees today, and it's using that to make marketing decisions. So the algorithms are watching everything you do online and using it to try and make money off of you. That's just how the internet works. So the fact that somebody who is in, a close proximity to you also is on these streams, that is not a coincidence. That's based on AI algorithmic marketing research. And, you do try to play the game a little bit, but at the end of the day, the amount of algorithmic coding that goes on, it is all completely rigged, and it's rigged in many, many different ways by many, many different people. And we need to build an in real life movement, right? And we're not building a social media fandom. There are people who hire firms and spend their whole life just trying to build social media firms. The other thing I was going to say, let me just add this. This is what I was going to say. In addition to the fact that, that there are a lot of people you recruit online who are not helpful, in addition to the ones that are helpful. In addition to that, the other point is that online recruitment for CPI is tapped out, right? In addition to the fact that there are people you recruit online who are not helpful, who don't really want to join an in real life community, it's tapped out, right? It's tapped out, right? There have been, I'm not going to go into detail, but there have been some maneuvers, and we're not going to expand very much through the internet at this point, which is fine, because the whole point of CPI was not to recruit through the internet, right? It was to recruit people who would never go looking for this. And so now is the time to just do it. Now is the time to white knuckle it and learn the dance move we've been meaning to learn for a long time, and just do it. We got to just do it. All right. Candace Owens was on the Jimmy Dore show earlier saying that Bolshevik Jews murdered millions of Christians. Well, Bolshevik Jews, there were a lot of Jewish people in the Bolshevik Party, but that's anti-Semitism right there. Stalin was not Jewish, and Stalin is widely accused of being anti-Semitic, right? And that, the Bolsheviks rejected any notion of a Jewish identity. And we talk about that. And I've talked about that on these streams. You read what Marx wrote on the Jewish question. You read what what Lenin wrote on Bundism. You read what Stalin wrote on the national question. The Bolsheviks were opposed to any form of Jewish identity politics, right? They said, we want Jews and Christians and Muslims in the same organization, and that celebrating the Jewish national identity is reactionary, right? That obviously anti-Semitism is also reactionary. The Bolsheviks did a lot to protect Jewish villages. Lenin gave a very powerful speech condemning anti-Semitism, but they also rejected any notion of going around and, cultivating a separate Jewish community that was separate from everybody else. They were completely opposed to that. Lenin referred to not just Zionism, but also Bundism, right? So during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, you had Bolshevism, which was, a form of communism. Then you had Zionism, which was a group of Jews who wanted to move to Palestine and start Israel. And then you had another current of Jews that were like halfway between being Zionists and Bolsheviks, and they were called Bundists. And they were like, oh, we need to create a separate socialist group just for Jews. And we need to have a separate socialist group that's Jewish only. Lenin himself was Jewish, and he ripped the Bundists to shreds. And he said, cut that shit out. And he said, the Jewish identity, the notion of identifying with Jewish culture and trying to preserve Judaism or whatever, and trying to celebrate and keep Jews separate as the separate thing, that is completely reactionary. And he called it the spirit of the ghetto. So the idea that Bolshevism is Jewish or something like that, there were many Jews who became Bolsheviks. And that's because Jews were pretty badly treated in Tsarist Russia. And they saw it as a way to fight for their freedom. And it's also because Jews had more freedom in feudal society throughout Europe than Christians did, right? They were the only ethnic group that wasn't forced to be Christian, right? And so they were allowed to question religious authority, engage in scholarship in ways that Christians weren't. They were allowed to lend money before Christians were allowed to lend money. And so Jews, they had a relationship with European society where they were kind of separate. They were segregated. They played a different role. They were kept isolated from the rest of society. They were pretty badly treated and oppressed. These riots, pogroms, where they go and burn them and kill them, that were awful. But on top of that, they were able to become educated in ways other people weren't able to be educated. They were able to lend money before other people could. And that it's complicated. There's a good book called On the Jewish Question that's written by a Jewish communist, Leon Abrams, who died in the Holocaust. And that book is actually a very, very good resource on, what Judaism is. And one of the things that's pointed out in that book is that all white Europeans have Jewish blood, because millions and millions of Jewish people converted to Christianity. Because everywhere that feudalism in Europe didn't seek to preserve Jews as a separate ethnic group to be moneylenders, Jews just converted to Christianity. And so millions and millions of Jewish people converted to Christianity, married Christians, had children with Christians. So the idea that there's some ethnic or biological Jew that's the premise of Nazism, Nazi ideology that was used to carry out and justify the Holocaust, was based on the notion that there is a biological Jew, right? These Jewish people, they have this genetic way of being that makes them communists, that makes them whatever, right? That's bullshit, because all of us have Jewish heritage. If you are a white European Christian, over the course of the last 2,000 years, at some point in your family tree, there is somebody who is Jewish, okay? And so, because millions of Jews converted to Christianity, everywhere that the Jews were not preserved as a separate caste for specific purposes in European civilization, they converted to Christianity. There are millions. There were millions of Jews throughout the history of feudalism in Spain and France and Britain and Germany and Russia who converted to Christianity. And so that's an important thing that needs to be understood. But, I'm sorry to hear that Candace Owens actually said that about Jews. I didn't realize. I know Candace Owens has been critical of Israel, and I actually agree with a lot of what Candace Owens says about Russia and stuff. But look, anti-communism is a really big part of the right wing. It's a really big part of the right wing. And it doesn't help that the synthetic left, which is very hateable, is going around speaking in the name of communism. And this is a big problem, right? So on the one hand, right, you have the right wing that's been just pounded into their head. Communism is your enemy. And then you have a bunch of very, very bad people that are agents of the biggest capitalists, the synthetic left, the woke people, that are speaking in the name of communism. So, of course, these people are going to hate communism. Of course, anything that sounds anti-communist is going to be sympathetic to them. But at the end of the day, what most people that are in the Trump movement want is economic growth, and they want an end to the wars. And they're going to have to, if they're really serious about that, they're going to have to be confronted with the reality that the governments that the USA wants to overthrow around the world are all building socialism, that what they call globalism, this global free trade system that is destroying countries around the world, this is called imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. The World Economic Forum are not communists. They are the masters of imperialism. And that if they want a government that supports working families and really would make America great, economically speaking, put the again question aside, but if you want a government that would make America great and full of opportunity again, that's only going to happen by breaking out of imperialism and moving towards socialism. Who was Murray Rothbard? Murray Rothbard was a libertarian thinker in the 1970s. I don't know that much about him. I know he endorsed a book that I frequently quote on these streams, which is, he endorsed this book. There's a quote from Murray Rothbard on the back of it. It's called The Yankee and Cowboy War. And this book by Carl Oglesby, who was a leftist and a Marxist, gives really great insights into the divisions in the ruling class. And this book is very, very helpful. And it draws from Carol Quigley and stuff. And Murray Rothbard, the libertarian, endorsed it, because he as a libertarian could see. That's one thing I give credit to libertarians about and to Lyndon LaRouche, is that they understand the divisions in the American ruling class and even the John Birch Society and the far right. What's the difference between Biden and Trump? What was the difference between Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson? What was the difference between Roosevelt and the people who wanted to overthrow him? This wasn't a fight between the workers and the bosses. These are both billionaire capitalists. It was a fight between the rich and the ultra rich, a fight between the Eastern establishment, or the Yankees, or the Anglo-American establishment, and the lower levels of capital, or the military industrial complex, or whatever. So there we go. All right. Did you see the Russian TV show Slavo Pazana? I have not seen that. I don't speak Russian. I don't watch a lot of Russian television because I don't speak the language. But Slavo Pazano, let's Google it. What was it? Slovo Penzano. The Boy's Word, Blood on the Asphalt, is a Russian crime drama. I haven't watched it. I don't speak Russian. So, but I'm sure it's available with subtitles. I thank you for the recommendation. I see some of the Russian fans here in the chat are really liking it. So I'll check it out. Thank you. Anti-communist, the official state religion of the United States. Sounds about right. Anti-communism is pumped at us in every way, shape, or form. I would argue that wokeism is the most toxic form of anti-communism at this point, because it claims to be Marxist, but it's promoting degrowth, it's promoting regime change operations, etc. The most toxic anti-communism that we've got at this point is the degrowth stuff, and is the wokeism that rallies around issues that communists in the past have talked about, but uses them to serve imperialism. So there you go. All right. I am unable to believe in such things as gods or fairies. How do you do it? Well, David, I'm not here to convince you to believe in God, right? This is an experience that, you will have when you're ready for it, or you won't. And, CPI, we are very open to people of religious faith. And I'd say the majority of us do believe in God to some degree or other. Not all of us, but, there is no religious test for membership in CPI. We are here to build a movement for a government of action to fight for working families. And we believe in the American Constitution that believes in the separation of church and state. I oppose any form of theocracy. It would never work in America, right? In America, we have separation of church and state. And we have it because at the time this country was founded, 9 of the 13 colonies had state religions. And in order to get all the 13 colonies to ratify the Constitution, they had to have Amendment number 1 that said, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And the reason for that was because Americans are way too religious to ever have the government embrace one religion over another, right? This is a very religious country. And because we take religion so seriously, it would be very, very, very difficult we should not ever have a religious government, right? If we tried to have a Catholic government in this country, the Baptists would rise up in arms. If we tried to have a Muslim government in this country, the evangelical Christians would rise up in arms. If we tried to have a Protestant government, the Catholics would rise up in arms. Like, we are too religious in this country to ever have a religious government, right? We need to have separation of church and state because and in Britain, they don't. In Britain, they have a state church, the Church of England, the Anglican Church. And it works out great in England because people aren't religious anymore. It's, they don't take religion that seriously. So, having a state church, whatever. As long as people that don't want to practice it can practice their own faith, it's fine. That would never work here in the United States, right? Culturally, the way America came into existence as a country, we could never have a state religion here. And as a movement that is American to its core, we're not trying to impose religion on anybody. We do celebrate religious faith. We are not hostile to religious faith. But believing in the separation of church and state and no religious test for membership, I think is very American in how we operate, right? I don't want to force my religion on anybody else. And I proudly stand arm in arm with Jews and Muslims and atheists and agnostics and pagans. There was a guy who came to our retreat in Vermont who was a pagan. He was wearing his pagan t-shirts. He's a Wiccan. Very good. Very good. All right. Examples of Christian imperialism. Well, first of all, let's be real about when you talk about imperialism, we're not talking about, when I talk about imperialism, I'm talking about a system, an economic system. However, many of the leaders who presided over this economic system have done so in the name of the Christian religion. The British Empire justified itself around the world in the name of the Church of England and in the name of Protestant Christianity, right? George W. Bush was a very Christian president of the United States who invaded Iraq and said he got orders directly from God to do so, right? I mean, there are many evil things that have been done in the name of Christianity. The economic system of imperialism, I don't think is particularly unique to any religion, but because it is centered around the West, and the West is where Christianity took hold, often the countries that, are the center of the global imperialist system justify their crimes, colonialism, slavery. They justify it with Christian rhetoric. There's no question about that. And I have no problem denying that. Slavery in the South, right? If you opposed slavery, and many people have written about this, in the U.S. South at the time of slavery, if you opposed it, people would say it's in the Bible. And that was the main way slavery was justified, is people would say it's in the Bible. And there are verses in the Bible where it says, slaves obey their masters, etc., and that Christianity was used endlessly to justify the horrendous transcontinental slave trade, the Middle Passage and all of that. And that was awful, right? I have no problem talking about the Crusades that were horrendous. Now, that was feudalism, but it was colonial expansion of the feudal system. That was done, genocide of Muslims, that was done in the name of Christianity. I mean, there are many evil things around the world. The colonization of Africa, the brutal crimes of British imperialism, the genocide in the Belgian Congo. All of this was done with Christian justification, right? But that doesn't mean that Christianity, the religion itself, is responsible. It means that bad people hijacked it. I don't blame Muslims for what Osama bin Laden did. I don't blame Jews for what Israel does. I don't blame the religion of Judaism, right? I don't blame Shintoism for what Japanese imperialism did. I don't, right? I think there's plenty of people in Japan who practice Shintoism, who pray to their ancestors, who light incense and do all of that, who are good people who realize that comfort women in Korea and the rape of Nanking was wrong. It just so happens the people who did the comfort women in Korea, the people who did the rape of Nanking, did it in the name of Asian identity and Shintoism. But can you be a Shinto in Japan and not be endorsing all the evil crimes of Japanese colonialism? Yes. Can you be a Muslim and not be endorsing all the crimes that have been committed in the name of Islam? Yes. Can you be a Jew and oppose the crimes of Zionism against the Palestinians? Yes. Can you be a Christian and oppose the Crusades and oppose the slavery and oppose colonialism? Yes. I think my point has been made. Anyhow, what was the influence of Feuerbach on Marx? The early Marx, Marx was a philosopher. The early Marx, right? Early Marx. He's writing a lot of polemics against Feuerbach. Was that, he's a left Hegelian and he's debating a lot of the philosophers. I believe, was Feuerbach the Holy Family? Was that it's been a while since I've read the early Marx. Was Feuerbach the Holy Family? Right? Is that Feuerbach? No. No. Or I think it was. Right? Right? Yeah, the Holy Family was Ludwig Feuerbach. Right, if I'm correct, right? And that's, Marx, that's one of the thinkers who was around at the time, and Marx argued against him and polemicized against him. Marx, his career, his life goes through a trajectory. First, Marx is a young philosopher, right? He's studying philosophy. And through philosophy, he comes across the philosophy of Hegel. But there are two different interpretations of Hegel. There's left Hegelianism and right Hegelianism. Hegel has the concept of historical progress and change coming through conflict, the dialectic. Marx, is a left Hegelian. He argues that the French Revolution and the struggle to end oppression, these are historical progress, right? And he's writing about philosophy. Then, as Marx develops his philosophy, around the time of the 1848 revolution, he gets very political, right? And he starts talking about politics. And the Communist Manifesto is published in 1848. And eventually the International Working Men's Association is formed, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. He writes about the uprisings in France, and then Marx spends the final years of his life as an economist, gathering data from the British Museum. He composes Capital. He composes the notes that lay the basis for the upcoming volumes of Capital. He composes the critique of the Goethe program, and that Marx goes through three stages. Feuerbach, right, is the early Marx. That's when he's arguing about philosophy. He's developing himself as a left Hegelian. He's developing the dialectical materialist worldview. And then from there, he develops a political movement called the Communist Movement. Then from there, he develops his economic theories. There is a big effort. I will say this. You saw my conversation with Doug Lane, right? And I think that was a great conversation. I'm looking forward to doing more work with Doug Lane. We come from different backgrounds, but we're able to talk to each other. But one of the reasons that it got a little heated between me and Doug Lane at one point, unfortunately, was because Doug Lane is he's a fish from a different pond, right? And he's arguing with me the Soviet Union isn't socialist based on all this Trotskyite. I said it was Trotskyite jibber jabber, which it was, but all of that. The academic Marxism, right, really fixates on really digging into the complex, how can we reinterpret, and it's this over-intellectualization of Marxism. And that probably sounds awful, but it's true, right? Of people who dig way too deep into Marx because they're trying to make it more complicated than it is. And that's what academics do. Academics, if your book is very simple and easy to understand, you're not doing your job as an academic, right? Academics work very, very hard to dig into obscurity, to obfuscate and make things complicated. So because Marxism, really the only place that people in our society encounter Marxism at this time is in the universities, right? Marxist Marxism that you encounter, if you encounter it in an academic setting, is going to be very, very over-intellectualized. For example, there's a really big effort to say that the early Marx and the late Marx are separate. Well, Marx learned, like anybody else, as he went through his life. His ideas evolved and changed over the course of his life. But the idea that like late Marx repudiates early Marx, that's not true, right? There's a pretty consistent theme throughout all of what he writes, right? There's a change in emphasis. There's a re-examination of certain concepts, but it's very consistent. But if you really dig into it, right, and you really go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, you can say, the early Marx contradicts the late Marx, and he reversed himself on all these things. Well, that's, again, if you really want to find that, you can. Right. And, there are, people who, the Frankfurt School and all of that, these people, they sit there and they just devour the philosophical texts and the manuscripts, and they're going through it, trying their hardest to, well, if you interpret this sentence this way, or you retranslate this way, or you put this in the context of this other book that was written at the same time. And, that's what academics get paid to do, and it's useful to some degree or other. But if you're building a mass movement, it is not useful. What I discovered when I was a teenager were the pamphlets of the Communist Party. William Z. Foster, those pamphlets, they were written in the most readable, comprehensible way to explain the vision of the Communist Party to people in a mass movement, right? Go read Why Communism by Moishe Olgin, which is included in our manual, right? In the CPI manual, but it's also on the internet. Just go read it, right? It's one of the most beautifully, plainly written pamphlets explaining communist ideas. Go and read Eugene Debs and his speeches. There is a lot written that just lays out Marxist concepts like overproduction, like the tendency of the falling rate of profit, like historical progress, like the contradiction between the worker and the factory owner, like the nature of the state, like, imperialism. There's a lot of very, what they call popular literature that explains Marxist concepts. I would encourage you to start with that, right? Then from there, read the classics. Read Marx and read Lenin. Lenin is far more important, I would argue, to read. Read the Communist Manifesto, Critique of the Goethe Program, the 18th Brumaire. There are important, Wages, Prices, and Profits. Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels is a very important book to dig into. But read Lenin. Read Left-Wing Communism. Read The State and Revolution. Read What Is to Be Done. Read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Read Lenin on the National Question. There's a lot of very important books written by Lenin where he makes very important points. And one thing that many people don't realize is that for every big Lenin book, there's like a 10-page essay that lays it all out there, right? And that's another thing, right? What Is to Be Done is a very long book that's very hard to get through. But there's an essay called Where to Begin that tells you basically everything it's like a summary of where to begin, what is to be done by Lenin. There's only 10 pages, right? So if you want to know what Lenin's saying in What Is to Be Done, the condensed version is an essay called Where to Begin, right? And, if you want to know what Lenin says in his pamphlet, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, go and read Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, which is an essay that he wrote. It's 10 pages. It's like the condensed version, right? One of the difficulties of getting through the Marxist classics is that the Marxist classics are written as polemics. They are written as so-and-so said blank, and they are wrong. It's actually blank. That is the style that they are written in. And if you are not familiar with the other person, and if you are not familiar with the context, right, of the debate, right, if you're 100 years later reading this, it can be very hard to get through. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to read What Is to Be Done backwards. That sounds crazy. But reading What Is to Be Done backwards the chapters of what is to be done in backwards order makes the book make way more sense, because the book starts out with a very specific argument, and then it expands to a more broad argument, and then it expands to, and then it ends. The final chapter of the book explains the entire history of Russian Marxism and what they need to do. Well, if you're reading it now, 100 years later, you need to start with the whole story and get more specific. So if you want to read What Is to Be Done and really get the most out of Lenin's book, What Is to Be Done, which is the key book that he laying out the theory of the Bolshevik Party, the Party of New Type, read it backwards. And I met my wife. Well, I didn't meet my wife, but my wife and I started dating at a time. I mean, dating isn't exactly the right word. We started being romantic, and we eventually got married as a result of a class I was teaching on What Is to Be Done. I was teaching classes on What Is to Be Done in New York City at the International Action Center. And that's how my wife and I got married. So there you go. So there you go. You might get married if you read What Is to Be Done. I'm just kidding, but there you go. All right. Lenin tells us read Hegel. I have not read as much Hegel as I want to, but I do have his essays on his lectures on Christianity. I found that to be fascinating. That was what somebody recommended. And I thought Hegel's lectures on Christianity are very easy to read, and they're very profound. He's going through and he's saying, like, what is unique about Christianity? And what's interesting about Hegel is it's not clear if Hegel was a Christian or not. And if you read it, he argues in defense of Christianity, which was the popular religion at the time, in a very pragmatic way. Christianity is good because it serves this purpose. Christianity is good because it encourages people to act in a certain way. Christianity is good because it adds. He's not arguing that Christianity is true. Right? He's arguing that Christianity is pragmatic, and that leads many people to wonder if Hegel was an atheist. Hegel's argument is that Christianity is the most advanced religion. It creates the most advanced society, but he's not arguing that it's true. And many people question, was Hegel a Christian? Was Hegel an atheist who was trying to justify Christian civilization? Hegel, his primary thing is he believes. Thank you. I have found the same thing. Hegel believes in the concept of historical progress. It's not based on the novel. It's not based on the novel, right? It's using the title of the novel. The title of the novel is a literary illusion. That novel was around at the time, and he used the title in a catchy way because that was a popular title. It was like a joke. It's not based on it. Right? That was a popular novel at the time in Russia called What Is to Be Done. So Lenin used the same title as a way to give his pamphlet like an ironic name. But it's not based on it. It's just using the title. Okay? The phrase What Is to Be Done was the big novel everybody was reading, right? It'd be like, if there was a movie that everyone was watching. I remember when I was a kid, when I was in 4th grade, Titanic was like the most important. Everyone went to see Titanic. The movie Titanic was the biggest thing. So back in, the 1990s, some communist named their book, ironically, Titanic. It wouldn't be based on the movie Titanic. It's all about communist groups and how they should operate and what's the strategy. But it would be, and that's what it was. He used the title as kind of an ironic joke. He's answering the question, how do we build a revolutionary movement that can actually win? And he's opposing bowing to spontaneity. He's talking about agitation and propaganda. He's talking about the Party of New Type. He's talking about democratic centralism. He's talking about why terrorism must be opposed as a tactic. He's talking about spontaneity. He's talking about how to cultivate agitators. What Is to Be Done is a really good book, but you have to there's so many obscure Russian names in it, right? He refers to Raboche DeLeo and the Narudniks and this person and that person. And you have to skim through all the obscure names to get to the points. And that makes it difficult to read, but it's a really important book. It's probably the definitive book, right? The Leninist theory of political organizing is largely based on that book. But that doesn't mean that book is above criticism. For example, one aspect of that book is there's a lot of lying to people. A lot of lying to people in that book. It's based on the assumption 60% of the population is illiterate. It's based on the assumption that most of the population is never really going to understand your ideas. But the people are suffering, and when the people are rebelling, you blow that rebellion up bigger and bigger and bigger. You don't let the spontaneity, you don't let it be spontaneous, because then it'll just lead it back into the system. You go and create a bigger conflagration, and there's enough of a conflagration that the party, can take power or whatever. So there you go. Living in Northwest Georgia. Rachel, are you near Steve? Are you near Steve, Rachel? Because Rachel's in Georgia, so I don't know if she's near Steve. I don't know exactly what part of Georgia Rachel is in, but she may very well be in the area. Send me an email, Steve, calebmoppin@gmail.com. I'll try to see if I can put you in touch with Rachel. There's plenty of organizing that does need to be done. But listen, we're almost, we're 2 hours and 40 minutes in. I'm going to put on the closing music. It's been fun. I am going to react to the debate tomorrow night, I think. So there we go. All righty. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.